The young Marine had been building up to it for about 10 minutes, the way some people build up to a thing they think is going to be funny. I could feel it coming the way you feel weather. He was 3 seats down from me at the departure gate, a lance corporal, maybe 21, in civilian clothes, with 2 friends flanking him in the particular restlessness of a young man who has an audience and no idea what to do with it except perform. I was in uniform, Army service uniform, the dark coat, the ribbons on the left breast, the gold oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel on each shoulder, a garment bag folded over the seat beside me. I had a 4-hour layover and a window seat waiting and no wish in the world to be interesting to anyone. He decided I was interesting anyway. It started with looks, then it moved to comments made just loud enough, to his friends but aimed at me, the coward's volume, the one that lets a man deny he said anything at all, something about how they let anybody wear that stuff now, something about costume rentals. His friends gave him the laugh he was fishing for, which is the only thing that ever encourages a man like that, and so, encouraged, he got up out of his seat and came and sat down 1 chair away from me, close enough to make it a conversation whether I wanted one or not. The gate was crowded, the way gates are in the late afternoon, full of the particular exhausted patience of people who have been traveling since before dawn. A woman across the aisle had 2 small children asleep against her, 1 on each side, like bookends. An older couple shared a paperback. A businessman had colonized 4 seats with his laptop and his charging cables, and the general air of a man who believes airports are his living room. Ordinary people at the tired end of an ordinary day, none of them looking for a scene, all of them about to get a small one, whether they wanted it or not, because a young man had decided he needed an audience, and I happened to be sitting inside his reach. I noticed all of them, because noticing the room is a habit I have never been able to switch off, a habit that has kept people alive, including me. I noticed which travelers had gone carefully still, pretending to read, the way people do when they can feel a confrontation building nearby and are hoping very hard not to be drawn into it. I noticed the gate agent glance up from her podium, register the young men, and decide, reasonably, that it was not yet her problem. I noticed, without yet understanding that I was noticing anything at all, the tall older man 1 row behind, who had lowered his newspaper by about 2 inches. "That's a costume, right?" he said. He said it with a grin, leaning toward me, sure of himself, in the way that only the young and the unbloodied get to be sure. He reached out and flicked the sleeve of my coat with 2 fingers, a small, contemptuous flick, the way you would flick lint. "Real ones," he said. "Don't look like you." His friends laughed. One of them, a heavier kid who I would later learn was named Mercer, laughed and then looked slightly ill at having laughed, which told me he was the one of the 3 with a conscience still in working order. But he laughed. They all laughed. I did not. I have learned over a long time and at some expense that the fastest way to find out exactly who a person is to be quiet and let them keep talking. Silence is a kind of open door. Cruel people cannot resist walking through it, and once they are through, they show you the whole house. This young man had already shown me a great deal in about 11 words. He had shown me that he believed a uniform on a woman was more likely to be a lie than a life. He had shown me that he needed the 2 boys beside him to think he was bold. He had shown me that he had never once, in his short life, been made to sit in the consequences of being wrong out loud. So I gave him the quiet, and I looked at him with the mild, patient expression I keep for exactly these occasions. And I waited, because that is usually enough. Most men like that, when they do not get the reaction they came for, get bored and go back to their seats. I have been doing this a long time. I was doing it before it had a name in my head. A quiet woman in a world built mostly by and for loud men learns early that the reactions she is being provoked into are almost never in her interest, that the flush and the retort and the tearful defense are exactly what the provocation is designed to harvest, and that the single most disorienting thing you can do to a person fishing for your composure is to decline, pleasantly, to hand it over. It reads, to them, as strength, though it is really just economy. I have a finite amount of myself to spend in a day, and I had long ago stopped spending any of it on strangers who had decided who I was before I opened my mouth. The Lance Corporal was drawing on an account I had closed years ago. He just did not know it yet. He thought my silence was the silence of a woman who could not think of anything to say. It was the silence of a woman who had thought of a great many things to say and had judged every one of them a waste of breath on him, which is a different silence entirely, though from the outside they can look the same for a little while. He was gathering himself for another one when the man behind us set down his bag. It was a soft sound, a leather 2-suiter set on the tile floor, but it landed in a small silence between the Marine's jokes, and something in the deliberateness of it made all 3 of the young men glance up. There was an older man standing behind the row of seats, tall, silver-haired, in a good gray suit, with the kind of stillness that does not come from a suit. He had been sitting one row back reading a newspaper, the way older men do in airports, invisible until he chose not to be. He looked at the lance corporal for a moment. Then he said one sentence, quietly, in a voice that did not need to be loud because it had spent 30 years being obeyed. I am not going to tell you yet exactly what he said, but I will tell you that the laughing stopped, all three of them at once, the way birds go quiet before something. And I will tell you that he knew exactly why I was there. Here is what the young Marine could not have known, because I had not given him a single fact to work with, which was, of course, the whole point of his certainty. I was traveling in uniform because I had been asked to, formally, in a letter that was folded in the inside breast pocket of the coat he had just flicked with 2 fingers. I do not, as a rule, wear the uniform through airports. Most of us do not. It draws exactly the kind of attention that is exhausting to receive. The handshakes and the thank yous, well-meant and heavy, and also, sometimes the other thing, the flick of a sleeve. But I had been asked to be in uniform when I arrived, and so I was. And I had resolved to sit quietly at the gate and read and not be a story. I am not a loud person. I have never been a loud person. When I was young, this was held against me repeatedly by men who mistook the quiet for softness, and I spent a certain number of years thinking they might be right before the world arranged an occasion to prove they were not. I came out the far side of that occasion with a permanent immunity to a particular kind of opinion. After a certain kind of day, the opinion of a stranger at a gate about whether your uniform is real has roughly the weight of weather on another continent. You note that it is happening somewhere. It does not touch you. There is a discipline to not reacting that people mistake for passivity, and it is nearly the opposite of passivity. Passivity is when nothing is happening inside you. What was happening inside me, sitting at that gate, was a great deal. All of it managed, all of it held. I had made a choice, long before that afternoon, about who gets to reach the controls of my composure, and the answer is a very short list, and a lance corporal I would never see again was not going to be added to it in a departure lounge. That is not the absence of a reaction. That is a reaction, chosen and enforced, which is a different and more powerful thing than the reflex he was trying to trigger. He wanted to see me flustered, defensive, scrambling to prove myself, because that would have confirmed his little theory that I was a fraud who could be rattled. Stillness denied him the whole story he had come to write. Stillness is not nothing. Sometimes stillness is the loudest thing you can do. So I did not defend myself to the lance corporal. I want to be clear that this was not saintliness. It was not that I was above it, or that I had achieved some serene detachment from insult. It was simpler and colder than that. It was that a receipt does not argue with a man who has decided the store was never open. The ribbons on my chest are not an opinion. They are not a claim I am making that he might dispute. They are a record, kept by an institution that does not hand them out to settle arguments in airports, and the idea of unfolding my letter or listing my postings to persuade a 21-year-old that I had earned my own coat was, to me, roughly as sensible as arguing with a child about whether the sun had risen. You do not win that argument. You cannot win it, because the argument was never about the sun. It was about the child needing to be the kind of person who decides when the sun rises. The lance corporal did not actually have a theory about my service. He had a need to be bold in front of his friends, and I was the nearest available surface to be bold against. The costume was never the point. I was never the point. That is the thing about contempt. It is almost never about the person it lands on. It is about the person throwing it, and what they cannot stand to feel, and where they have decided to put it instead. I have thought a great deal about why the sight of a woman in a uniform provokes this particular reflex in a particular kind of man, and I have arrived at an answer I find sad rather than infuriating, which is progress. Because for a lot of years, I only found it infuriating. The uniform is supposed to mean something fixed. It is a promise of a hierarchy that makes sense, a world where the badge matches the person the way he expects. And a woman standing quietly inside that uniform, wearing awards he did not expect to see on a body like mine, is a small crack in a story he needs to be solid. He cannot say that, of course. He does not even know it. So instead of feeling the crack, he reaches for the flick and the joke, which is a way of insisting that the crack is not real, that the story is still solid, that the problem is my costume and not his map of the world. It is easier to call a stranger a liar than to update the map. It is always easier. Updating the map is the single hardest thing a human being is ever asked to do, which is why so few of us do it, and why the ones who do are worth their weight in almost anything you care to name. None of which I owed the Lance Corporal, and none of which I was going to explain to him at a gate. But it is why I was not angry exactly, sitting there. You cannot be very angry at a boy for being frightened of a world larger than his map. You can only be sorry that no one has yet made him draw a better one, and hope, distantly, that the world gets to him before his certainty hardens all the way through. So I kept my eyes on the window and the aircraft beyond it, and I let him talk, and I waited for the boredom that usually ends these things, and instead I got a lieutenant general setting down his bag, but I did not know that yet. I only knew that a man behind me had said something quiet, and the air had changed. The first man who decided I was too soft to matter wore gold oak leaves of his own, and his name was Major Alan Prosser, and it was the year 2009. I was a lieutenant then, 25 years old, and I had just been assigned to a line company as a platoon leader ahead of a deployment, and Major Prosser did not want me. He was not cruel about it exactly, which in a way made it worse, because cruelty you can dismiss and disappointment you cannot. He was disappointed. He looked at my file, which was full of good marks, and he looked at me, quiet and precise and not given to filling a room, and he decided that the two things did not add up to a combat leader. He told me so. He did me that courtesy, if you want to call it that. He called me into the company office, and he sat me down, and he said, in the tone of a man giving useful career advice, "You're organized, Doyle. Best staff work I've seen from a lieutenant. But a rifle company needs a fighter, not a librarian. I need people who fill up a room, you disappear in one." A librarian. I have been called worse since, and by better men, but that one had a particular sting because it was said kindly, and because a small part of me was afraid he was right. I did disappear in rooms. I did not raise my voice. I had watched louder officers get the benefit of every doubt simply for being loud, and I had begun to wonder whether the quiet that felt like my whole self was in fact a defect I would have to overcome to be any good. That is the real damage a Major Prosser does, and it is worth naming precisely, because the young Marine at the gate did a version of it to whoever he does it to, and someone did a version of it to him, probably, before he learned to pass it on. The damage is not the insult itself. The insult passes. The damage is that the insult, delivered by someone with authority over your future, plants a seed of agreement in you. It makes you audit yourself in their terms. It takes the truest, most load-bearing part of you, the part that is not a flaw at all, and hangs a question mark on it. And you carry that question mark around for years, doing excellent work while quietly wondering whether the way you do it is somehow illegitimate. I spent a good part of my 20s being quietly excellent and quietly ashamed of the quiet, which is an absurd thing to be ashamed of, and I only stopped being ashamed of it when a valley proved, in the most expensive way imaginable, that the quiet was not a bug to be patched, but the exact feature the worst day would require. I do not tell the Prosser story to be bitter about him. I genuinely am not anymore. He was working from a bad map, the same as the Lance Corporal, the same as all of us at one time or another. He had been handed a picture of what a combat leader looks like, and it was a loud picture, because the people who drew it for him were loud, and he could not see past the frame of it to the actual officer in front of him. That is not evil. It is just small and unexamined and common, and it does real harm precisely because the people doing it almost never think they are doing anything at all. Prosser thought he was giving me helpful career advice. That is the thing about the small, unexamined harms. They come wrapped as favors. I did not argue with Major Prosser. I did not fill up the room to prove I could. I went back to my platoon, and I did the unglamorous, invisible, methodical work of getting 38 young soldiers ready for a place that was going to try very hard to kill them, and I did it in my own quiet voice. And I did not spend 1 ounce of energy trying to look like a fighter to a man who had already decided what a fighter looked like. There is a specific loneliness in being underestimated by the person who controls your future. It is not the loneliness of being disliked, which at least has some drama to it. It is quieter and more corrosive than that. It is the loneliness of doing excellent work in a language your evaluator has decided not to read. I ran the best prepared platoon in that company. My soldiers could do their jobs in their sleep because I had drilled them patiently and without spectacle until the hard things were easy. And Major Prosser looked at all of it and saw a librarian because I did it quietly, and quiet was the one quality his map had filed under weak. I could have gotten his attention by being louder. I knew that. Louder officers got his benefit of every doubt. But I had made a decision, somewhere in there, that I was not going to become a worse leader in order to look like a better one to a man who was measuring the wrong thing. If the price of his good opinion was performing a version of command that would get people killed, then his good opinion was too expensive, and I would do without it. He had them confused, is the thing. He thought calm was the opposite of fierce. They are not opposites. Calm is what fierce looks like when it has somewhere important to spend itself and has decided not to waste any of it on being seen. The loudest man in a firefight is almost never the most dangerous one. The most dangerous one is the quiet one who is still thinking, whose hands are steady, who is 3 decisions ahead of the noise. I did not know how to explain that to Major Prosser in 2009, and I did not try, and 2 years later I did not have to, because a valley in a country far from that office explained it for me at a price I am still paying, and I will come to that, because it is the center of everything. And because it is the thing the young Marine at the gate had reached out and flicked with 2 fingers. But I have never been in a hurry to get to it. It waits for me whether I hurry or not. The older man in the gray suit came around the row of seats and stood where the lance corporal could see all of him. "Son," he said, "you're about to be very sorry you opened your mouth in front of me." He did not raise his voice. That was the remarkable thing. I have been around powerful men my whole adult life. And the truly powerful ones almost never shout because shouting is what you do when you are not sure you will be obeyed. This man was sure. He said it the way you would mention the weather to someone about to walk into it, a courtesy more than a threat, and the lance corporal, who a moment ago had been the boldest man at the gate, went still. "I'm sorry," the young Marine said in the reflexive way people say it when they have not yet understood what they are apologizing for. "Sir, is she? Are you too?" "I don't know her personally," the man said, which was not quite true, as I would learn, but was true in the way he meant it. "But I know exactly where she is going, because I am going to the same place for the same reason. And I promise you that when you find out what that reason is, you are going to remember this conversation for the rest of your life." He turned to me then, and something in his face rearranged, and the hardness he had turned on the Marine was gone, replaced by something careful and almost gentle, and he said, "Colonel, are you all right?" And it was in the word, Colonel, and in the particular way he said it, that I finally looked at his face instead of his suit, and placed him and felt the floor of the moment shift under me. Because I did know him. It had been 15 years, and he had gone gray and gained the weight of high rank, but I knew him. In 2011, in the Valley, he had been a lieutenant colonel, my battalion commander, the man on the other end of the radio on the worst day of my life. His name was Whitfield, and he was not, anymore, a lieutenant colonel. There were 3 stars where the oak leaves used to be. Malcolm Whitfield was a lieutenant general now, and he was standing in an airport in a gray suit telling a 21-year-old that his life was about to change, and he was here, in this terminal, on this day, for exactly the same reason I was. "I'm fine, sir," I said. My voice came out steady, which I was grateful for. "It's good to see you." "It's very good to see you," he said, and he meant it, and for a moment the gate and the Marine and the whole silly, cruel little scene fell away. And it was just the 2 of us and a thing we had both survived and did not need to name. There are people in your life with whom no small talk is possible, because you shared an hour so large that everything smaller than it feels like a lie. Malcolm Whitfield is one of about a dozen such people for me. We had not spoken in perhaps 6 years. It did not matter. The Valley was still in the room the moment I placed his face, the way it is always somewhere in the room for both of us, a piece of furniture only we can see. He had been a voice on a radio for the worst 40 minutes of my life. I had never been able to hear him in the years since, without also hearing the static and the sound of my own breathing and the flat mechanical calm I had put into my own voice, because 30 men needed it to be there. And now here he was in a gray suit in an airport with 3 stars he had earned partly on the strength of a day he and I did not discuss, telling a 21-year-old that his life was about to change, and the coincidence of it that we should both be flying to the same ceremony, that he should be 1 row back when a boy decided my ribbons were a lie. was so large that I did not know what to do with it, except stand there and let it be true. The lance corporal looked between us, and I watched the first real fear arrive in his face. The fear that is not about getting caught, but about having been wrong in a way that cannot be taken back. It is one thing to be caught doing a small bad thing. It is another to begin to suspect that the small bad thing you did was actually enormous, that you had misjudged not just a person, but the entire scale of the situation. That the quiet woman you chose because she seemed safe was the least safe possible choice in the building. I watched that arrive in him, and I did not enjoy it quite, but I did not look away from it either. Here is where it would have been very easy and very fair to do nothing. Because a lieutenant general had just taken an interest, and lieutenant generals are not gentle instruments. Malcolm Whitfield could have ended that young man's afternoon, and possibly a good deal more than his afternoon, with about 4 more sentences. He could have asked for the lance corporal's name and unit. He could have made a phone call. There are mechanisms, in our world, for a general who witnesses a Marine publicly accusing a decorated officer of stolen valor. And none of those mechanisms are kind, and every one of them would have been within the rules. And the 2 friends flanking the young man had gone the specific gray color of people who have just realized they are standing next to a lit fuse. And part of me wanted it. I am not going to pretend otherwise, because the whole value of what came next depends on my being honest about this. There was a version of the next 60 seconds in which I simply sat there, quiet as ever, and let General Whitfield do the thing that generals do, and it would have been just. The young man had reached out and flicked my sleeve. He had called the work of my life a costume. He had done it for a laugh, in front of an audience, to a stranger he had decided was safe to be cruel to precisely because she was quiet and female and alone. There is an old, hot, tired part of me that had been flicked one too many times over the years and wanted very much to sit back and watch the fuse burn. It would have been fair. It would also have been small. Because I have been on the other end of a powerful man's certainty. I know exactly what it is to be 25 and quiet and written off by someone with rank, told I was a librarian, told I disappeared in rooms, and I know what it did to me and how long it took to undo. And the thing about being handed the power to do to someone what was once done to you is that it is a test, and it is a test that almost everyone fails, because failing it feels so much like justice. The young man was not Major Prosser. He was not any of the men who had decided about me over the years. He was a scared 21-year-old who had just discovered, in the worst possible way, that the world was bigger and heavier than his little performance had accounted for. Crushing him would have felt wonderful for about 4 seconds, and then it would have made me one more powerful person using a frightened young one to settle a debt he did not personally owe. And I have watched what that does. I have watched, over a career, a great many senior people discover that a junior person has handed them a perfect excuse. And I have watched them take it and take it and take it and call it accountability while they enjoyed it, and I have never once seen it make the junior person better. It makes them careful. It makes them quiet. It teaches them to hide the ugly thing rather than to lose it, and a hidden contempt is more dangerous than an open one because you cannot correct what you cannot see. The Lance Corporal's contempt had at least done me the favor of being loud. It was out in the air where it could be worked on. Bury it under a general's boot, and it would go underground and set like concrete, and in 10 years he would be a sergeant who would simply learn to sneer where the cameras could not see. And the world would have one more of those, which is the last thing the world needs. There's a test hidden inside every moment when you are handed power over someone who wronged you. And the test is this. Are you trying to fix the wrong, or are you trying to enjoy the wrongdoer's pain? They feel almost identical from the inside. That is what makes the test so hard. The desire to teach and the desire to punish wear the same face and use the same words. And the only way I have ever found to tell them apart is to ask, honestly, in the half second I have, whether I would still do the thing if no one were watching and I got no satisfaction from it at all. If the answer is yes, it is probably justice. If the answer is no, it is probably just me feeding something in myself that a frightened boy happened to be standing near. I stood up. "Sir," I said to General Whitfield. "With respect, he's mine for a minute." Whitfield looked at me. He is a perceptive man. He had been about to bring the full and considerable weight of his office down on the Lance Corporal, and he stopped, with the sentence still half-formed, and he read my face. And he understood something, and he did a thing that told me everything about why men had followed him into that valley in 2011. He stepped back. He gave me the moment, he said. "He's yours, Colonel." And he picked his newspaper back up, though he did not read it, and he let me have the young man. I turned to the lance corporal. He flinched, actually flinched, braced for the strike, and I understood that in his imagination, the next thing coming was destruction. Because destruction was what he would have done with the power if the positions were reversed. And it is a hard thing to look at a young man and see that he expects cruelty, because cruelty is the only tool he knows is in the drawer. "What's your name, Marine?" I said. "Nolan, ma'am." His voice had lost all of its earlier volume. "Lance Corporal Nolan." "Sit down, Lance Corporal Nolan." He sat. There's a thing that happens when you give a lawful, quiet, reasonable order to a young service member who is braced for a storm, which is that the very reasonableness of it lands harder than any storm would have. He had cocked himself for shouting he knew how to survive. Shouting he could have filed under unfair, could have nursed later with his friends as a story about a colonel who lost her temper. I did not give him that. I gave him a chair and a level voice. And it left him nowhere to hide, because you cannot resent a person who is being fair to you. Fairness is the one response contempt has no defense against. It just sits there, undeniable, and makes you look at yourself. His two friends were frozen where they were, and I glanced at them, the heavier one, Mercer, and the third whose name I never learned, and I said, "You too? Sit down as well. You laughed. You're part of this." And they sat, fast. I did not raise my voice. I have told you I do not know how, and it has never once been a handicap. I sat down across from Lance Corporal Nolan, close, so that this was a conversation and not a performance. So that the gate full of travelers, pretending not to watch, would have to strain to hear, because what I was about to say was for him and not for them. "I'm not going to yell at you," I said, "and I'm not going to let the general end your career," which he was about to do, and which he still can. "So for the next couple of minutes, you are the luckiest young man in this airport, and I need you to spend that luck wisely by actually listening to me. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am. You accused me of stolen valor," I said. "You know that's what you did. You looked at a woman in a uniform and you decided, out loud, for a laugh, that she was a liar. You didn't ask. You didn't wonder. You were sure. Do you understand that there are people, real ones, who wear these because of the worst days of their lives, and that when you call it a costume, you are not insulting the cloth. You are spitting on the day." He opened his mouth and I could see the reflex forming. It was just a joke. The universal defense of every person who has ever been cruel in front of witnesses. And I stopped it before it could get out, because I have heard it 1,000 times and it is always a lie. Not because the person did not think it was a joke, but because of what they are really saying, which is that their entertainment matters more than your dignity, and that you should absorb the cost of their fun so that they do not have to feel the discomfort of having caused it. "Don't tell me it was a joke," I said. "I know it was a joke. That's not the defense you think it is. A joke has a target, and you chose one. And you chose me because you looked around this gate and decided I was the person least likely to make you pay for it. You didn't pick the businessman with the 4 seats. You didn't pick the general behind you, though you didn't know he was a general. You just knew he was a big man in a good suit, and some part of you did the math. You picked the quiet woman. That math, the fast, quiet math that told you I was safe. That is the thing I actually want to talk to you about, because that math is going to run your whole life if you don't learn to hear it running." He had gone very pale. "Ma'am, I didn't." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't know a single thing, and you were completely sure anyway. That combination is the most dangerous thing a person can carry, and you are going to carry it your whole life if nobody stops you. So today, in this airport, I am going to stop you. Not by ending you, by telling you what those ribbons are. I want to tell you why I bothered, because it would have been easier not to. It would have been easier to let the general handle it, or to accept his stumbling first apology and turn back to the window, or to simply board my flight and let him carry his small, ugly afternoon wherever he was going. I bothered because I have been the young and certain one too. Not in that exact shape, I never flicked a stranger's sleeve, but I have been sure about people I knew nothing about. Sure in the quiet, private way that does not make a scene, but does just as much damage over time, and I know that the only reason I am not still that person is that a handful of patient people took the trouble to correct me when correcting me was inconvenient for them. They could have let me go on. It cost them something to stop and turn me around. I am the sum of those inconvenient corrections. And the only honest way I know to pay that debt is to spend the same inconvenience on the next certain young person the world puts in my path, even when that person has just insulted me. Especially, maybe, when that person has just insulted me. Because that is exactly the moment they most expect to be written off. And being taken seriously instead is the thing that cracks the shell. Here's what I need you to understand, I said. I am not doing this because you deserve my time. You spent whatever you deserved from me when you flicked my sleeve. I'm doing it because somebody did it for me once, when I was about your age and about your level of sure, and I've owed it forward ever since. So you're not getting a favor. You're getting a payment on a debt that has nothing to do with you. Sit still and receive it. I did not need Lance Corporal Nolan crushed. I needed him changed. Those are different jobs, and only one of them lasts past the boarding call. And I have never had much patience for the kind of justice that feels enormous in the moment and teaches nothing that survives the week. It was General Whitfield who told them, in the end, because it is not a thing I would ever have said about myself. He set his newspaper down again, and he spoke. And this time he let his voice carry, not loud, but pitched to reach the whole seating area, because he had decided, I think, that the lesson should not be private after all, that a public wrong could stand a little public correction. In 2011, he said, in a valley I'm not going to name, this officer was a captain commanding a company that got cut off. There were casualties. The resupply and the medical evacuation could not get in, because the ground the aircraft needed was under effective fire, and no one could suppress it long enough to matter. He paused. I know this because I was her battalion commander, and I was on the other end of the radio, and I listened to a 27-year-old captain in a voice about as calm as the one you just heard organize a way to get her wounded out that should not have been possible. It cost her. It cost her more than I'm going to say in an airport. And the reason the two of us are in this terminal today, in this ridiculous coincidence, is that after 15 years and a records review, the Army has finally decided to correct the citation, and I am flying to the ceremony where I will pin the award on her myself. The gate was very quiet. He did not say more than that about the day. He did not need to, and I was grateful that he did not, because there is a version of that account that turns me into a hero for an audience, and I have never been able to stand that version, because it edits out the three, and the three are the whole point. Whitfield knew that. He gave them the fact of the day without giving them the movie of it. He is the only person who is on that net who has never once tried to make it into a story where I win. He knows there is no version where I win. There's only a version where most of them came home, and a version where fewer did, and I was handed the first version at a cost that does not appear on any citation. So, Whitfield said, looking at Lance Corporal Nolan, without heat now, which was somehow worse than heat. That is the costume you flicked with your fingers, son. That is the receipt you decided was fake because the person holding it did not look the way you had decided a hero is supposed to look. I want you to sit with that. I want you to sit with the fact that your idea of what a soldier looks like was so small and so unexamined that it did not have room in it for the actual soldier sitting 3 feet away from you. That is not her problem. That was never her problem. That is a defect in you, and the only good news I have for you is that defects like that can be fixed if you are willing to look straight at this one instead of away from it. The gate was very quiet. The woman with the 2 sleeping children was awake now, watching, and the businessman had stopped typing, and the whole tired end of the ordinary day had turned toward us and gone still, and no one was pretending to read anymore. Nolan sat with it. I watched it land on him, the whole weight of it, and to his credit, whatever else was true of him, he did not try to defend himself. Which is the one thing that would have made it unforgivable. He looked at me and his eyes were wet and he said, "Ma'am, I didn't know." "That's the point," I said. "You didn't know, and you were sure anyway. That's the whole lesson. It's not that you were cruel to a stranger, although you were. It's that you were certain about a person you knew nothing about. The uniform was real. Next time it might not be. Either way, that was never yours to decide with a flick of your fingers and a joke for your friends." The thing he had treated as light had turned out to be the heaviest thing at the gate, and he was 21 and holding it for the first time. And there's no way to hold that lightly once you know what it weighs. He apologized properly after that. Not the reflexive sorry from the beginning, the one that is really a plea to make the discomfort stop, but a real one, slow and miserable and without any audience left to perform for, because his friends had stopped being an audience and become witnesses, which is a different and more sobering thing to be. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry. Not because he's a general and not because of what you did. Because of what I did. I was trying to be funny for those two idiots, and I picked you because you were quiet and I thought you'd take it. That's the worst part, isn't it? I picked you because I thought you were safe to be cruel to." "Yes," I said. "That is the worst part. I'm glad you can see it." I could have left it there. It would have been complete. But he was 21 and stupid in the specific, curable way that the young are stupid, and I have never had much interest in curing that kind of stupid with a hammer, because the hammer does not teach. It only frightens us, and a frightened man learns to hide his contempt, not to lose it. I wanted him to lose it. "Look at me, Lance Corporal," I said, and he did. "You are going to remember this for a long time, and you are going to be tempted to remember it as the day you got humiliated in an airport. Don't! That's the small version, and it will make you bitter, and bitter is just contempt that learned to sit still. Remember it as the day you found out you were the kind of man who was certain and wrong, and that you didn't have to stay that kind of man. That's the useful version. That's the one worth carrying." Mercer, the heavier one, the one who had looked ill at his own laughter, spoke up then, quietly. "For what it's worth, ma'am. Thank you. For not." He did not know how to finish it. "For not letting the general end your friend," I said. "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated, then said the thing that was actually on his mind, which took a small courage of its own. "I laughed too. At the start. I want you to know I know that. I'm not going to pretend I was just sitting there." I looked at him, and I revised my estimate of him upward, because the willingness to name your own part in a thing, without being made to, without hiding behind the louder person beside you, is rarer than it should be, and worth more than it costs. "I know you laughed," I said. "And I know you stopped, and I saw your face when you stopped, and I saw that you didn't like yourself for it. That's the whole of a conscience, right there. That little not liking yourself when you catch it. Most people spend a lot of energy learning to switch that off. Don't. It's the most useful thing you've got. It's the thing that was trying to tell you the joke was wrong before your friend even finished it." Mercer nodded, and something in him settled, and I thought, not for the first time, that the young are not a lost cause, not remotely. That they are mostly just undertaught and oversure, and that the entire job of anyone older is to get to them with a better map before their certainty finishes hardening. That is what leadership actually is under all the ceremony. It is getting to people with a better map in time. "I didn't do it for him," I said, and I looked at Nolan when I said it. "I did it because somebody once decided what I was, with a lot less cruelty than you managed, and it took me years to climb out from under it. And I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever had the power to bury somebody the way I'd nearly been buried, I wouldn't use it. That's all. It isn't about you. Most things aren't about the person they land on. Remember that too." The boarding call came over the speakers then, their flight, and the three of them stood, and for a moment none of them quite knew the protocol for leaving a thing like that. There is no drill for it. Nolan settled it by coming to attention, properly, the way he should have, from the start, and holding it for a second longer than he had to. And I understood that the extra second was the whole of what he could not say. I gave him a small nod, and that was enough, and they went. They boarded before we did, as it happened, and Lance Corporal Nolan stopped at my row on his way to the jet bridge and stood at something close to attention and said, "Safe travels, ma'am." And I said, "You too, Marine." And that was the last I saw of him for a while. Then General Whitfield and I boarded our own flight, and by some further coincidence, or perhaps not, we were seated across the aisle from each other, and for a while neither of us said much, because there was not much that needed saying between two people who had been in that valley. I sat with the invitation in my breast pocket, and I thought about what the medal was actually for, which is the thing I try not to do too often, because it does not get lighter with handling. Let me tell you the part I never tell strangers, the part under the citation, because you have come this far with me, and because the Lance Corporal will never hear it, and someone should. The valley was narrow and steep, and we should not have been strung out in it the way we were, but the ground gives you the options it gives you, and not the ones you want. My company was moving to relieve a position when the lead element took fire from high on both walls at once. the kind of ambush that is planned and patient and waits for you to be exactly where you are before it opens. Within a minute, I had wounded. Within 2, I had men pinned in the open with no good way back, and the fire coming down was heavy enough and well aimed enough that the first instinct, the human instinct to send people out to drag them in, would only have produced more men in the open and more of them bleeding. That is the trap of an ambush like that. It uses your decency against you. It counts on you to do the brave, stupid, immediate thing, and it kills you for it. I did not do the immediate thing. This is the whole of what the medal is for if you strip away the language, and it is not a proud story, it is an arithmetic one. I got on the radio in the flat voice that Major Prosser had once mistaken for weakness, and I did the cold work. I found where the fire was actually coming from, not where it felt like it was coming from, which are different things when the walls are throwing echoes at you. I put what suppression I had onto the near gun first, because the near gun was doing the killing, and I made the men who wanted to move stay still for 90 more seconds, which is the longest 90 seconds there is. Well, I got the geometry right. And then, when the near gun was suppressed and not before, I moved the casualties in a sequence, worst first, along the one piece of ground that the far gun could not quite reach, and I talked Malcolm Whitfield through what I needed from the aircraft, in words calm enough that the pilots could use them, and we got the wounded out. Most of them. We got most of them out. There were 3 we did not. 2 were gone before I ever picked up the radio, which I know, which the report confirms, which does not help at 3 a.m. The 3rd was a 19-year-old named. Well, I say the names to myself, and I do not spend them in airports or in stories, so I will keep his here too. The 3rd was a boy who did everything right and was in the wrong 6 feet of that valley when the far gun found the range, and I have gone over those 40 minutes 10,000 times looking for the decision that saves him, and I have never found it. And the not finding it is a particular kind of life sentence that the medal does absolutely nothing to commute. That is what calm under fire actually is. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision to postpone the feeling until the feeling cannot get anyone else killed, and then to pay for the postponement, with interest, every night for 15 years. Major Prosser thought calm was the opposite of caring. He had it exactly backward. The calm is how much you care. Weaponized, aimed, and held. It is the most expensive thing I own. They are giving me an award for the worst day of my life. That is what these things always are, if you look closely at the ones that are real. Nobody earns the serious decorations on a good day. You earn them on the day everything went wrong, the day the plan failed and the enemy had a vote and the ground would not cooperate, and young men who trusted you were bleeding on it. The medal is not a trophy. It is a scar the army decided to make out of ribbon so that it can be worn on the outside. And the citation, the official words, will talk about my actions, my leadership, my calm under fire, because that is what citations do. And it will not have room for the 3 names that are the actual content of the day. 3 of my soldiers did not come home from that valley. The award is, in every way that matters to me, theirs. I was the one who lived, and living is not the same as deserving, and the gap between those 2 things is where I have made my home for 15 years. When they pin it on me, I am going to stand up very straight, and I am going to think about the 3. And I am going to accept a piece of ribbon for the worst day of my life on behalf of the men who paid for it and cannot be there. That is what the Lance Corporal called a costume. He could not have known. That is the mercy of the young, that they get to not know for a while. My only real quarrel with him was never the insult. It was the certainty. You can be ignorant and kind. What you cannot afford to be, ever, is certain and wrong, because certainty is what turns ignorance into cruelty. And he was one flick of the fingers into a lifetime of it before a general set down a bag. I looked out the window at the country going by underneath, the whole wide patient country, and I let the valley be quiet in me for a while, the way it mostly is now, and General Whitfield across the aisle let me have the quiet because he knew exactly where I was, having been there too. The ceremony was 2 days later, in a hall with flags, and General Whitfield pinned the award on my coat with his own hands, and read the 3 names into the record when he did not have to, because I had asked him to, and he is the kind of man who honors that kind of asking. It was done properly, in daylight, in front of people who understood the weight of it, and I stood up very straight, and I thought about the 3, and it was, in the way these things can be, both the heaviest and the most honest hour I have spent in a long time. The families came. That is the part I had not let myself think too hard about beforehand, because thinking about it too hard is how you fail to get through it. The mother of the 19-year-old was there, older now, smaller than I remembered from the one time we had met. And she found me afterward and took both my hands in both of hers, and she did not say anything for a while. And neither did I, because there was nothing to say that either of us did not already know. Then she said, "He wrote home about you. He said his captain was the calmest person he had ever met. He said it made him feel safe." And she watched my face while she said it, because she is a mother and she knew exactly what she was handing me. And she handed it to me anyway, on purpose, as a gift and not a wound, which is a generosity I am not sure I could have managed in her place. I have carried a great many things out of that valley. That sentence is the only one that is not heavy. He felt safe. It does not undo the arithmetic. 3 did not come home, and no medal changes that number. But a 19-year-old, in the last weeks of his life, wrote to his mother that he felt safe because of the quiet I had spent years being told was a weakness. And if the whole of my career amounted only to that one sentence in one letter, it would have been enough. It would have been more than enough. It would have been a life well spent. Major Prosser, wherever he is now, was wrong. He was not wrong in a way that I need him to admit, or even to know. That is the freedom I finally found somewhere along the way. I stopped needing the people who misjudged me to issue corrections. The correction is not their job, and it never comes, and waiting for it only chains you to them. The boy's mother gave me more in one sentence than every belated apology I could ever extract from every man who ever called me a librarian. Calm made her son feel safe. That is what calm is for. That is what it was always for. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. About 3 weeks later, a letter reached me, forwarded through the sort of chain that letters take when someone only half knows where to send them. It was short, and it was written by hand in the careful block printing of a young man who does not write many letters, and it was from Lance Corporal Nolan. He did not grovel in it, which I respected. He said that he had thought about the airport every day since. He said that he had told the story to his platoon, all of it, including the part where he came off looking like exactly what he had been, because his gunnery sergeant had once told him that the only mistakes that are truly wasted are the ones you keep to yourself. He said he had told them so that the next young idiot who felt the urge to flick a stranger's sleeve for a laugh might hear his voice in his head first and sit back down. He said he was sorry, again, and this time he did not ask me to make him feel better about it, which is how I knew the sorry was real. He signed it with his rank and his name and nothing else. I read the letter twice, standing in my kitchen, and then I sat down, because it had done something to me that I had not expected a letter from a lance corporal to do. I had assumed, if I ever thought about him again, that the airport would become for him what these things usually become, a story where he was the victim of an overbearing colonel and a lucky general, sanded down over the years into something that let him off the hook. That is what almost everyone does with their worst moments. We are all very talented editors of our own footage. He had refused to edit. He had kept the footage intact, the ugly parts included, and then he had screened it for the people most likely to think less of him for it, on purpose, because he had decided that his own comfort was worth less than the chance that the next young idiot might sit back down. He did the one thing that turns a mistake into something useful, which almost nobody does, because it is the hardest thing. He told on himself, out loud, to the people whose opinion of him he cared about most, so that the next one would not have to learn it the way he did. Most people spend the rest of their lives quietly defending the version of the story where they were not really wrong. He stood up in front of his platoon and made himself the warning. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, very close to everything. I keep his letter folded with a copy of the citation in the same drawer because they belong together. The citation is the record of a day I could not prevent. The letter is the record of a young man who decided to change on purpose. One of them the Army gave me. The other one I would not trade for a second medal because it is the rarer thing by far. I want to say something now to you, whoever you are. If you have ever been decided about on sight, flicked like lint, called a costume, told you were a librarian when you knew you were a fighter, mistaken for less than you are by someone who did not do you the courtesy of asking a single question first, then you already know the sting, and you already know the temptation, which is to unfold your letter and list your postings and make them see. Resist it. You do not owe a performance to someone who decided you were nothing. The truth of you does not require their belief to be true. Let it arrive on its own, in its own time. It usually does, And when it does not, you are no less than you were. Their certainty was never a measurement of you. It was only ever a confession about them. And if you are ever the one who is sure and turns out to have been wrong, which will happen to all of us because it is the human condition, then I will tell you the thing I told the young Marine at the gate. Do not spend the moment defending your certainty. That road only makes you smaller. Say the two hardest words, which are not, "I'm sorry, but I didn't know," and then go and become the kind of person who finds out first, who asks before deciding, who holds their judgment the way you would hold something breakable belonging to someone else. That is worth more than any apology, and it is available to you at any age. And it is the whole difference between a person who made a mistake and a person who is one. I think often about how close that young man came to never learning any of it. And if General Whitfield had been on a different flight, if I had worn civilian clothes like I usually do, if the gate had been quieter or louder, or if I had been the kind of person who fires back and turns it into a shouting match that teaches nobody anything. It was luck mostly that turned his worst moment into his most useful one. And that is worth sitting with too, because most people who are certain and wrong never get the airport, never get the general, never get the letter afterward. They just go on being certain and wrong, gathering others like themselves, hardening a little more each year, and no lieutenant general ever sets down a bag behind them. The lesson found him. It does not find most people. So if it has found you, in whatever form, at whatever gate, do not waste it defending the version of yourself that needed it. Take it. Be changed by it. That is the entire difference between the people who grow and the people who merely age. Be sure last, not first. The truth can carry its own weight, and it will carry yours too if you let it. And if you are ever the quiet one at the gate, the one somebody has decided is safe to be cruel to, know this. Your stillness is not weakness, and you do not have to prove a single thing to a stranger who did not do you the courtesy of a question. Let the truth arrive on its own. It is stronger than their certainty, and it is patient, and it always, always outlasts them. Thank you for standing your watch with me.